I was just looking for some old tax papers in the storage box when I found them, neatly folded letters, tucked inside an envelope with my husband's handwriting on the front. Curiosity turned into horror as I read the words inside. I still dream about you. We were always meant to be. This is a story of trust, betrayal, and the painful choices we never think we'll have to make. Before we get into the story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. If you had asked me a few months ago, I would have told you that my marriage was solid. Not perfect, because no marriage is, but good. Strong. I loved Eric, and I truly believed he loved me too. We had been together for 5 years, married for 3. We just bought our first home, a cozy 2-story with a backyard that I had already started picturing our future kids running around in. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which gave me a lot of flexibility. Eric, on the other hand, worked as an accountant. He was practical, steady, the kind of guy who never forgot to pay a bill and always kept his gas tank full. That was one of the things I had always loved about him, his reliability. He made me feel safe, like no matter what, he'd be there. And for a while, I had no reason to question that. But then, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. His phone, which had always been just another object in the house, suddenly became something he guarded like a secret. Whenever he got a message, he'd tilt the screen away before answering. If I asked who it was, he'd shrug and say, "Just work." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But then there were the late nights. The extra hours at work. The moments when I'd catch him staring off into space, his mind clearly somewhere else. I told myself he was just stressed. Tax season was coming up, and he always got busier around this time. Then one evening I was folding laundry when I pulled one of his shirts out of the pile, and the scent hit me. Perfume. And it wasn't mine. I held the fabric close to my nose, inhaling deeply. It was floral, sweet, something light but noticeable. My stomach twisted. There had to be a reasonable explanation, right? Maybe he brushed up against someone at work. Maybe it was just from being in a crowded elevator. But deep down, I felt it. That first small crack in my trust. I finished folding the laundry and put his shirt on his side of the bed, my mind running in circles. I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but something inside me whispered, "Pay attention." And so I did. I tried to shake it off. Really, I did. For the next few days, I convinced myself I was overthinking. That the perfume on Eric's shirt didn't mean anything. That I was just being paranoid because I'd been scrolling through too many TikToks about cheating husbands. But once a thought like that enters your mind, it's impossible to ignore. It lingers. It grows. Eric didn't help, either. His behavior didn't change. If anything, the small things that had been bothering me before just became more obvious. His phone, always face down on the table. The way he'd get a text, glance at it, then slide the phone into his pocket like it was something I wasn't supposed to see. The late nights. The vague excuses. The way he touched me less. I noticed it one evening when I reached for his hand while we were watching TV. Usually, he'd squeeze my fingers, maybe trace little circles on my palm without even thinking about it. But this time, when I laced my fingers with his, he hesitated. Just for a second. Then he squeezed my hand quickly, like he was making a conscious effort, and pulled away to grab the remote. It was small. Barely noticeable. But I noticed. And that's when the doubt started sinking in like a slow leak in a boat. The night I almost checked his phone. It got to the point where I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. I would watch him and wonder, who are you talking to when I'm not around? What are you thinking about when you get that faraway look in your eyes? And then one night, I almost crossed a line I never thought I'd cross. Eric was asleep beside me, his breathing slow and steady. His phone was on the nightstand, just within reach. I stared at it for what felt like forever. I'd never been the type to check his phone. We had always trusted each other. But now? Now there was this gnawing, awful feeling inside me, and the only way to get rid of it was to know. I reached out, just barely brushing my fingers against the phone. And Eric shifted. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I snatched my hand back as he mumbled something in his sleep, turning onto his side. I swallowed hard, pressing my palms against the blankets. My hands were shaking. I felt guilty. I hated that I felt guilty. I wasn't the one hiding something. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to go through his phone. Instead, I rolled onto my side, staring at the wall in the dark. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I needed to trust my husband. And I might have believed that. Until the day I found the letters. It started as a normal afternoon. Eric was at work, and I was digging through the storage boxes in the attic, looking for an old tax document we needed. It was hot up there, stuffy, the kind of heat that made the air feel thick. I had a bottle of water next to me and my hair pulled up in a messy bun, swearing under my breath as I shuffled through stacks of old paperwork. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't snooping. I was just trying to find a stupid tax form. But then my fingers brushed against something that didn't belong. It was an envelope. A plain white envelope tucked between some old receipts and bank statements. It wasn't sealed, just folded closed. The handwriting on the front was neat. Familiar. Eric's. And beneath his handwriting, just one name. Rachel. I froze. For a moment, I just stared at it, my brain scrambling to make sense of what I was looking at. Rachel. I didn't know a Rachel. At least, not one that had ever come up in our relationship. I hesitated, my stomach twisting itself into knots. Don't. That's what my gut was telling me. That whatever was inside this envelope, I wouldn't want to see it. That opening it would change something I could never unchange. But my hands were already moving. I pulled the envelope open and slid out a small stack of folded papers. The second I unfolded the first one, my heart sank. I recognized Eric's handwriting immediately. The way he looped his G's, the way his Y's curled at the end. It was his. I started reading. And my entire world cracked in half. Rachel. I still think about you every day. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we had never let go. If we had fought harder. If things had been different. We were always meant to be. My hands started shaking. I swallowed hard and kept reading. I don't even know if you'll ever see this. Maybe it's stupid to even write it. But I can't help it. Sometimes I dream about you, and when I wake up, it takes me a second to remember where I am. And who I'm with. I miss you. I felt like I was going to throw up. I flipped through the other letters. They were all the same. Longing. Regret. Words from a man who was still in love with someone else. Someone who wasn't me. I clenched my jaw, willing myself to breathe. Maybe these are old, I thought desperately. Maybe they're from before we were together. But there were no dates. No way to tell when he had written them. Had he ever sent them? Did Rachel even know how he felt? Or were these letters just his way of holding on to something he wasn't ready to let go of? I felt like I was drowning. Because whether they were old or new, whether Rachel knew or not, the truth was right there in black and white. Eric had loved someone else. And maybe, just maybe, he still did. I sat there in that hot, stuffy attic, gripping those letters like they might disappear if I let go. And for the first time since I had started suspecting something was wrong, I knew I wasn't imagining things. I had proof. Now I just had to decide what to do with it. I didn't say anything right away. I couldn't. For the rest of the afternoon, I sat in the attic, the envelope clutched in my hands, my thoughts running in circles. Part of me wanted to tear the letters up, pretend I had never found them, and go on living in the version of my marriage I had always believed in. The other part of me, the part that felt like my chest was caving in, knew that wasn't an option. So I did the only thing I could do. I put the letters back into the envelope, walked downstairs, and set them on the kitchen table. Then I waited. The moment of truth. Eric came home around 7, just like always. I heard his keys jingle as he stepped inside, his usual greeting already forming on his lips. Hey babe. Then he saw it. He stopped mid-step, his entire body going still. His eyes landed on the envelope, and right away, I saw the shift. The way his face tightened. The way his throat bobbed as he swallowed. He knew. He didn't have to ask what it was. He didn't have to open it. He knew. Where did you find that? His voice was quiet. Controlled. I kept my hands flat on the table, gripping the edge just to keep them steady. In the attic, I said. I was looking for tax papers. Silence. Then finally, he exhaled through his nose and dragged a hand over his face. They don't mean anything, he muttered. I let out a hollow laugh. They don't mean anything? I shook my head, my pulse hammering. Eric, you wrote that you still dream about her. That you were meant to be. Do you know what it feels like to read that? To realize the person I love is dreaming about someone else. He shut his eyes for a second, like he was bracing himself. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Nothing. I could see the war happening behind his eyes, the hesitation thick enough to suffocate me. And that hesitation? It told me everything. The truth comes out. Finally, after what felt like forever, he let out a slow breath. She was my first love. His voice was softer now. It was a long time ago. I pressed my lips together, waiting. He glanced at the envelope again, then at me. I never sent those letters, he said. I don't know. I guess I wrote them to get it out of my system. Get it out of his system. I squeezed my hands into fists under the table. You love me, right? My voice cracked. You chose me. His gaze met mine, and I saw it, the regret. The sadness. The answer he didn't want to say out loud. I swallowed hard. Eric, I whispered. If she came back right now and asked you to be with her, would you go? He froze. Opened his mouth. Then closed it again. I let out a shaky breath, blinking against the sting in my eyes. That's my answer, I said. His face crumpled. It's not like that, he tried. I love you. I built a life with you. But you still think about her. He didn't deny it. And that hurt more than anything else. I pushed my chair back and stood. I needed air. Space. Anything but this moment, this crushing, suffocating realization that I had been sharing my life with a man who was still holding on to someone else. Eric reached for me, but I took a step back. I just need time to think, I whispered. I walked away before he could say anything else. Because deep down, I already knew. No matter how much I loved him, I wasn't sure I could live my life knowing I was someone's second choice. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind going in circles, replaying our entire relationship like a movie on loop. Every moment, every memory, every time I had looked at Eric and thought this is it, this is love. Now all I could think about were the letters. Had he ever truly been mine? Or had I just been filling the space she left behind? Beside me, Eric was still awake too. I could tell by the way his breathing never settled, the way he kept shifting slightly, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Finally, when the weight of silence became unbearable, I whispered, "Are you in love with her?" He stiffened. It took him a second to answer. "No," he said, but it didn't come out right. Too slow. Too uncertain. I swallowed, my throat tight. "Then why did you write those letters?" He sighed, turning onto his side to face me. In the dim light, I could just barely make out his expression, tired, conflicted, heavy with something I couldn't name. "I don't know," he admitted. "I was young when we were together. She was my first love, and for a long time, I thought she'd be my last." Something inside me cracked. "But she wasn't," I whispered. "I was." Eric exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. "I know," he murmured. "I know that. And I love you, I do. I do. Not of course I do, not with everything in me, not without a doubt. Just I do." The room felt smaller. Tighter. Like the walls were closing in. "Did you ever send them?" My voice barely came out. He hesitated. "No," he finally said. "I never sent them." The answer should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because it wasn't about the letters anymore. It was about the fact that he had written them at all. The breaking point. For the next few days, I felt like a ghost in my own house. I went through the motions, woke up, made coffee, worked on my freelance projects, but it was like I was watching myself from the outside, moving on autopilot. Eric tried. He texted me during the day, left my favorite tea on the counter before work, even ordered takeout from the little Thai place I loved. But it all felt forced. Like he was trying to remind himself that I was the one he had chosen. And I hated that I could feel the difference. Then one evening, I was sitting on the couch when Eric walked in. He looked at me for a long time before finally saying, "I miss you." I glanced up from my phone. I'm right here. That's not what I mean. His voice was soft. I miss us. I studied him carefully. The man I had built a life with. The man I had once believed was my forever. And then before I could stop myself, I asked, if she showed up today and asked you to be with her, would you go? His face paled. Babe. Just answer, I said quietly. If she walked through that door right now and said she wanted you back, would you go? The silence stretched between us, thick and unbearable. He looked at me, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw the answer in his eyes before he even said a word. He didn't know. He hesitated. And that was my answer. The choice that saved me. I think part of me had already made the decision before that moment. I just hadn't wanted to admit it yet. That night, while Eric was in the shower, I pulled out a suitcase. I didn't rush. I didn't grab everything. Just enough. Enough to give myself space. Enough to breathe. When I zipped it up and set it by the door, I felt something strange. Not anger. Not devastation. Relief. I was choosing myself. When Eric came out of the bathroom, his hair still damp, his eyes immediately landed on the suitcase. He froze. What are you doing? I swallowed, gripping the handle a little tighter. I think I need some time. His face crumpled. No, he said quickly. Please, let's talk about this. We have, I whispered. And the only thing worse than being with someone who doesn't love you is being with someone who isn't sure if they do. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I deserve more than that, I said softly. Eric didn't argue. He didn't beg. And that told me everything I needed to know. The goodbye that wasn't bittersweet. I don't remember much about the drive to my sister's house. Just that I rolled the windows down, let the night air wash over me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. The pain was still there, of course. The hurt. The heartbreak. But underneath it, there was something else. Hope. I had spent so much time trying to be the person Eric needed, trying to prove that I was enough. But the truth was, love isn't something you convince someone to feel. It's either there, or it's not. And I finally understood that the best thing I could do, the bravest, strongest thing, was walk away. Not because I didn't love him, but because I finally loved myself enough to let go.